Joining us now to discuss the reopening process and what it could mean for the November election is Erin Perrine, the Director of Press Communications for the Trump campaign. Erin, when we look at the idea of reopening schools, is it something that is just as popular as reopening businesses?
When you look at reopening schools, what we see is a majority of parents and adults really do favor reopening schools. And President Trump is firmly behind that because there's really a holistic approach and a myriad of reasons why we should be opening schools again. You talked about the rates of infection and sharing. Those are obviously considerations that are taken into this. But when we talk about this, we're talking about children's ability to get an education so that they can get ahead in life. We're talking about parents being able to get back to work. We're talking about the fact that the American Association of Pediatrics believes that students need to be able to be together again in that learning environment. And we also know that especially for lower income children, those in lower income communities, a lot of them get breakfast and lunch at school. So there is really a lot of reasons why we should be looking at getting kids safely back to school. And President Trump wants schools to reopen and do so safely. It's very important.
That's such a good point that you bring up, too, because when we talk about reopening, we don't talk about what people are not getting when things are not open. I mean, yes, we understand that people aren't getting paychecks, but there's also ulterior problems that are happening among these lockdowns. I mean, we could talk about the overdose rate that's skyrocketing at this moment. We could talk about the increase in domestic and child abuse cases. I mean, there's so many underlying things that don't make the same headlines in the sake of politics. So I think you're right to say that we do need to find a way to get back to normal because it's not just a matter of paychecks. It's also about education, as you were saying, among all those other ideas. So when we talk about reopening right now, too, how important is that for businesses as well to get the economy going and get people just back to their normal everyday life?
Getting America reopened safely is hugely important, not only for students, for moms and dads, for families, for single people. It's important for the country as a whole to be able to get back, to get the economy moving, but to get people into work. You touched on it a little bit there, Alex, but when you talk about what lockdowns mean, it's more than just fighting the virus. It is an increase in cases of domestic violence. It is an increase in overdose deaths, the mental health issues that come behind being locked down at home, and those who don't always necessarily have a safe home environment. It's important that we get open and obviously the economy moving. We see President Trump bringing back almost 5 million jobs in 1 month. Those are huge numbers. The economy is a huge factor, but there's so many things that go into when we talk about reopening America, and safety is paramount. President Trump has worked tirelessly with the CDC, with health experts, with localities, with states to make sure that when they reopen, they do so safely with appropriate protocols in place.
And Erin, even when we talk about lockdowns, I mean, it transcends so many different issues. A lot of experts are even saying that when we look at the unrest on the streets, when we look at some of the violence taking place in New York and Chicago, places like that, that could be a result of some of these lockdown orders. People not going to school. I mean, whenever there's a long weekend, you can see an increase in violence. It's something that happens outside of coronavirus. And so a lot of these issues are coming back to these idea of lockdowns. Does this come back to maybe something that contrasts the two different campaigns and something that we see on a debate stage, hopefully sometime soon? Do we have any updates on when we can kind of see those two candidates differ on their different opinions on a debate stage?
I mean, no announcements to make at this point when it comes to debates, but the contrast is clear. President Trump stood up and said, we need to do the work as a country to slow the spread of the virus, to be able to put safe measures in place and to be able to ramp up testing, PPE, ventilators. America did that work, and they put guidelines in place to be able to safely reopen and for states to see where their numbers were to be able to begin to get back to things. Joe Biden has been a step behind throughout the coronavirus. The president had already implemented the Defense Production Act when it came to stepping up and making the government step in to say that businesses needed to be able to help out in helping secure our nation. Joe Biden called for it after it already had been implemented by President Trump. The contrast is clear. Joe Biden thinks he wins when America loses and he hides in his basement. You see President Trump out front leading on the coronavirus, working with allies, working to make sure America is prepared not only for this pandemic, but for ones down the road when the Obama-Biden administration left the cupboards bare for pandemic preparedness. We know that President Trump, and the contrast is clear, stepped up and showed true leadership. Joe Biden just hid in his basement.
And we already see some op-eds coming out making the case of why Joe Biden should not have debates. I think that is something that we're going to see a little bit more and more as we get closer to the time where they are expected to take the stage, because it's become evident that the strategy is to keep him out of the public eye for as long as possible. And I think if they can extend that to debates, they're going to do everything they can in order to get there. But Erin Perrine, I always appreciate you coming on, breaking down the status of the 2020 election. Thank you.